Good morning, everyone. It's time to go on the record.
Oh my God!
It has happened again. Slaughter in America. What has to happen to get Congress to act?
I never used my family tree to get a break or get ahead.
Senator Elizabeth Warren defends her heritage claims and takes on the president while doing it. Does this immunize her for the 2018 race? One of the Republicans who would like to replace Senator Warren is here this morning. Much to discuss with Jeff Deal. And
President's Day 2018. We sample some thoughts.
From WCVB Channel 5, the inside word from Washington to Beacon Hill. Today's newsmakers are going on the record.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Ed Harding, along with News Center 5's political reporter Janet Wu. Thank you for joining us on the record this morning. Joining us this morning is Jeff Deal. He is a GOP candidate hoping to unseat Elizabeth Warren in the U.S. Senate. He is currently a state representative from Whitman. Some will remember him as co-chairman of the Massachusetts for Trump campaign in 2016. And I'll let you in a little inside baseball. He said, this is the most awkward moment of the show, so now we're beyond it. So you don't have to worry about it. Great to see you this morning, Jeff.
Thank you very much for joining us this morning.
See you.
So it's been a few days, but I think on the minds of most Americans is what happened down in Florida. The suspect in the Florida school shooting clearly had a mental health issue, but he reportedly owned a number of guns, including a semi-automatic rifle. You have a 100% rating with the Gun Owners Action League here in Massachusetts, and the NRA rates you at 93%. So my question to you, of course, is are current gun laws sufficient?
The biggest problem, I think, in this case was we're dealing with someone who there was red flags currently. The FBI was alerted to the fact that he had given signals he may do something like this. And the other thing, too, was I believe he was suspended from school for bringing ammunition. Current gun laws in Massachusetts would prevent something like this. He would be reported and ultimately, I think, make sure that he would lose that gun license. In Florida, you know, I'm not sure about their state gun laws, but something should have been happening. And the FBI now, we've seen twice a situation where they did not investigate when there were red flags. The Pulse nightclub was another case where they dropped the ball.
But you are running for U.S. Senate. Do you think federal gun laws need to be altered to deal with it? Because apparently this young man bought the guns legally in Florida at the time that he purchased them.
You know, the Second Amendment states that gun laws, you know, that the right of people to own a gun shall not be infringed. And I believe in that right. And the other thing, too, is there's an effort to try to say that this gun, the AR-15, is at fault. It is a semi-automatic gun, just like a handgun that shoots one round with one pull of the trigger. So it's not the gun, it's the person, I think, in this case. And again, when there were red flags with the fact that he was indicating that he was going to commit something and the FBI was alerted to this, nothing happened. Those are part of the problems. And like you mentioned earlier, mental health checks to make sure. A lot of folks that at that school, including a lot of students, said they expected this to happen. People need to be reporting what they're hearing and seeing of other students who may have mental issues.
Which is an issue, absolutely. Here's the secondary part of it. So you believe that a semi-automatic rifle we should allowed to possess those guns. That you believe the Second Amendment gives you a right to own a semi-automatic rifle?
Absolutely. I mean, it is.
Why is the degree of difficulty in talking about this so high? Where's the logic that says what purpose does a semi-automatic rifle serve? No one's arguing about the right to bear arms, but a semi-automatic rifle?
I think, again, it is one pull of the trigger shoots one round of ammunition. That is the definition, and it's not, again, the style of gun. It is the situation is lawful gun owners, you know, in Massachusetts, for example, go through background checks. There is a suitability clause by local law enforcement that what we need to do is make sure that those who are getting guns have that check that's making sure that there is no mental health issue in the background.
Well, regulations to sort of make it tougher for folks with mental health issues to buy guns were rolled back not long ago after President Obama left office. Do you think that was the right move to do?
Look, you know, again, we're dealing with a situation where there were red flags about this person. Clearly, the FBI knew that this person was a problem. They went to go talk to the person that reported him, but didn't go talk to the person.
But yet he was allowed to purchase a gun, though, even though he did have a long history of mental illness.
Right. And again, you know, the Constitution allows people to carry and have guns. We're not going to change the Constitution. I think there's Democrats and Republicans that have voted in the past to keep that, you know, in place. It is a matter, in my opinion, of making sure that when there are indicators like the students and even the administration of that school not, you know, reporting it. Again, we're learning about this as it's going, so I can't fully, tell you every detail. But what it sounds like was, if he had brought ammunition to school, that should have also gotten the police involved.
All right, let's move on to the next item. Most voters outside the GOP inner circle know you as Donald Trump's #1 advocate here in Massachusetts. The question is, will this help you in winning the nomination? First of all, just winning the Republican nomination and then the right to face Senator Warren in the fall.
Well, the president actually won in Massachusetts the primary with his largest margin of victory until he hit his home state of New York. And that was with 13 Republican candidates in the field. I think that gave him a really strong showing, obviously, with the Republican base in Massachusetts. But even beyond that, he got 1,088,000 votes in the state of Massachusetts. That's more than our current Republican governor, Charlie Baker, got when he was elected as governor. So the votes are there for someone who's going to go to Washington and try to make a difference and drain the swamp and try to actually be accountable for the people of Massachusetts, which is why I believe I'm the better choice than Elizabeth Warren.
So you think being his #1 advocate in Massachusetts will help you win the nomination? Do you think that that's a feather in your cap?
Well,
right?
let's put it this way. All the congressional delegate members, 9 congressmen and women and 2 senators, are Democrats. Right now you have a Republican House and Senate and White House. How does any one of them have any seat at the table when things are coming up, especially a new transportation bill that's getting teed up, which is critical to Massachusetts?
When was the last time you spoke to the president himself? Or to anybody that's very close to him?
Well, I spoke to the president before the election. Since then, it's been certainly a year for him of transition getting into office. I've been down to the White House just a few months ago. I mean, I certainly talked to plenty of people that are involved with this.
Did you speak to the president when you went to the
Not
White
at that
House?
time.
Okay.
And what about help from the National Party? Are you expecting that before the primary?
Well, first of all, we already know that the National Party, the state party, would like to see Elizabeth Warren no longer in office. I believe that they will step in at some point. There is a primary going on, so of course they have to, by rule, sort of wait to a certain period. But in my opinion, this race will be one of the big races they want to get themselves involved in, because it is so important, not just to Massachusetts citizens who are getting nothing out of their current senior senator, but also to the people of America who are dealing with an obstructionist that's trying to block everything that is happening, including voting against the tax reform that is giving Massachusetts citizens, 80% of them, tax reductions.
Let's talk about Russia. The U.S. intelligence leaders here are warning that Russia's interference with this year's election is certain. Does this worry you? And do you think that President Trump is doing enough to stop it?
Look, I think both campaigns were warned back in the 2016 election that Russia may be getting involved, and I think it was the Clinton campaign that decided to ignore the issues. And of course, now we've seen the FBI, seemed to be politicized during the campaign to trying to say that Trump was involved with Russians. That's now being discredited on a daily basis. But as far as the upcoming campaign, no, look, it doesn't surprise me that foreign nations are trying to involve themselves in these races.
But more importantly, do you think President Trump is doing enough to try to prevent it from happening?
Beyond knowing what's going on the surface level as citizens, I'm not sure if we're privy to all the information that's going on behind the scenes. Sorry?
But he is, no? Should he be doing more?
If you're aware of the situation, I would think that the appropriate government agencies would be doing their best to try to block that.
Let's go through a couple of things. How important is it to build the wall that Donald Trump has talked about? In a nutshell, it is very important, least important.
Absolutely integral to any discussions about future immigration reform.
Should $25 billion be spent to build it? Yes or no?
$113 billion are spent annually to support people federally. Those are federal dollars annually to support those who come to our country illegally. In Massachusetts, it's $1.8 billion out of our $40 billion budget. So the savings, the return on investment, is incredibly overwhelming evidence that it would pay to build the wall. And it has to happen because that is where we've had repeat people, as far as breaking law on immigration and coming across the border. We've got to secure a border before we even talk about anything else regarding immigration law.
We're going to make a 180-degree turn to the left here, and we're going to talk about the OTR pop quiz. You go bam, so like that, real quickly. All right, today's OTR pop quiz, a political potpourri. Question 1, President Trump's former Oval Office aide, Rob Porter, continues to be in the news. He lost his job when it became public that his 2 ex-wives accused him of abuse. Porter has 2 ties to Massachusetts. They are 2 ties to the state of Massachusetts. They are?
I'm going to guess he went to college in Massachusetts.
That's half right. Yes, he did. So you get a partial point for that.
Okay.
He graduated from Belmont High School, and he's a graduate of Harvard, where he was a president of the campus Republican group. Question 2, Charles Johnson, a notorious internet troll, is gaining favor with some in Washington for his far-right views. Where in Massachusetts does the 29-year-old say he honed those opinions? Charles Johnson, an notorious internet troll.
I'm lucky to be able to use, Facebook or Twitter on the campaign trail. I do not know about this somewhat notorious, I guess, internet troll, so I will say I do not know that.
Milton Academy, where he was the lone conservative and campus provocateur. We're going to take a break.
Right.
We'll be back with Jeff Diehl in just a minute.